Okay, welcome to this GCSE RS revision video. This is Buddhist practices, and this is video 5 of 5, and we're looking at death and mourning. Death and mourning. So, Buddhist death ceremonies. What do we need to know? Well, some key vocabulary first of all. First of all, merit and merit transference. At a Theravada funeral, offerings are made on behalf of the dead to the monks of the Sangha, who are considered a field of blessing and can pass on good merit to the dead. It's the only time in Theravada that there's any sense of this merit transference. Quite a lot of that in Mahayana already. Then we have the idea of offerings for the dead. The family will give the monks extra offerings, such as white robes, to the Theravada monks at a funeral to make merit, puna, on behalf of the dead. The idea of merit itself is related to karma. Non-arhats, so people who aren't monks, will be moving on to their next life. So the family will try and gain extra merit for them, good karma. After 3 months, and then yearly, the family will offer money to the monastery as merit for the deceased person, again under the rubric of the field of blessing. Preaching, an important thing that's done on behalf of the dead in Theravada, is when a monk will come to the family home a week after the death and preach a sermon, and the family will give the monk a dinner. Bardo. In Tibetan Buddhism and in Mahayana in general, there is this belief in the state immediately after death until rebirth, described quite a lot in detail in Tibetan tradition. It means the in-between state. Theravada Buddhists do not think there is such a gap between death and rebirth. This is described in the Book of the Dead. Along with chanting, this book is read during a Tibetan funeral and a wake to guide and help the deceased through the 49-day Bardo period, the 3 phases of this period, to achieve a successful transference to rebirth. As part of the process of this transference at rebirth is a sky burial. So ground is unsuitable for burying people in the Himalayas, and so they take the body to the top of the mountains and allow the vultures to eat the body. This is an offering to the animal. Buddhists respect animals as equals, and it emphasizes the fact that Buddhists do not need to be attached to their body. It's thought the dead person, as well as the living, can learn about this non-attachment from this practice. In Japanese funerals, the idea of the precept name or spirit name at death. In Japanese funerals, the body will be cremated, and family members will pick out the bones with special big chopsticks from the ash and keep them in an urn. In Japan, the family will buy another name, a precept name for their loved one. This stops their spirit returning every time their name is called. So they give them a name that is not mentioned and not spoken out loud if the family say their name. Ashes are usually buried in a family or a group grave or tomb. So in Buddhism, it teaches that when a person dies, their karmic energy leaves their body and is reborn in a new one, unless Theravada and they claim you've gone to Nibbana. Death is not seen as the end, only a movement from one body to another. It is human nature to grieve, to mourn the loss of someone you have loved. The Buddha taught about impermanence, anicca, as being a natural part of life, and a funeral is a good opportunity for Buddhists to practice this. Funeral customs differ between different Buddhist traditions and even in different Buddhist countries. Some funerals can be very elaborate and some can be very calm. So why are these practices, rituals important? Buddhist beliefs concerning death are rooted in the principle of rebirth, life, death, and rebirth. We learned this in Buddhist teaching, the idea of samsara. This is the belief that when a person dies, they are reborn. This means their karmic energy leaves their current body, is transferred, or is reborn to a new one. The Buddha gave the image of a candle and a flame being passed from one candle to the next. This is a cyclical process and continues until Nibbana is achieved. Thus, for Buddhists, death is not seen as the end. It's merely a period of transition. These beliefs have a significant impact on the rituals and practices associated with death and mourning in Buddhist countries. One reason death ceremonies are important is because they provide comfort to the living. So we talk about them as important for the dead and important for the living. This is supported by the parable of the mustard seed. So in the story, Kissi Gautama had lost a child and was sent by the Buddha to find mustard seed from a house where no one had died or suffered loss. And she couldn't, and this taught her the truth of anicca, or impermanence, that applies to everyone and it's an inevitable part of life. Through the death ceremony, mourners can come together to accept and acknowledge death and begin the grieving process. But death ceremonies are important for the dead person as well. They allow positive karma to be gained on behalf of the dead person through acts of generosity or dana by the mourners. The deceased can accumulate positive karma, aiding in their rebirth process and possibly allowing them rebirth in the higher realm. A Tibetan Buddhist monk, Thurban Zupa, has said, "The hour of death, the king and the beggar are exactly equal, in that no amount of relatives or possessions can affect or prevent death. But who is the richer at the time of death? If the beggar has created more merits, then although he looks materially poor, he is a really rich man." So merit is really important for most Buddhists, not quite all. In Pure Land Buddhism, it's about whether Amitabha can help you. Now, common across Buddhist tradition seems to be the funeral shrine. The shrine is set up to display the deceased person's portrait, along with offerings to the Buddhas of candles, incense, and flowers. Monks will attend a funeral of a lay person and give a sermon, perform Buddhist death rites. The deceased person can then be buried or cremated, although the latter is more common. Monks will perform the last rites because the casket containing the dead person is sealed. Family members and friends may lift the casket as an act of final service, while others will be in silence. Family members may walk behind the hearse. All mourners will send good karmic thoughts to the family and contemplate the impermanence of life. And here we can see on the right 3 examples of different funeral shrines from Theravada. Notice the offerings and the flowers and the picture to the dead person. In the top, from Japan, notice the little sticks pointing up. These have the kenshi, or the precept name of the dead person. And notice the Tibetan funeral shrine at the bottom with the Bodhisattva statue at the back and the person in the front in the picture, and all the offerings, all the many bodhisattvas actually lined up along the bottom. Specifically, Theravada funerals there. For example, in Sri Lanka, which is a Theravada country, at a funeral, the family will give cloth for making new robes for the monks. The funeral ceremony will include chanting of verses about impermanence, and about a week after the person died, monks will come to the family home and deliver a sermon. Thereafter, at 3 months and 1 year, the special merit-making ceremonies for the benefit of the deceased person. Theravada Buddhist community may focus thus on the transfer of merit through the instrument of the Sangha, which is seen as a kind of means of blessing, a field of blessing. This means that rather than spending money on an elaborate funeral, funds may be donated or used for worthy causes. And this generates positive karma or karma. This karmic merit is transferred to the deceased and will hopefully have a more favourable rebirth. Theravadan Buddhists believe that it's possible to transfer karma from your own good actions onto someone else at death, possibly not any other time. They pass it on to the dead person in the hope that it will give them a favourable rebirth. Family and friends may also complete rituals such as offering cloth to make new robes to a senior monk of a nearby monastery on behalf of the deceased person. In the end, the deceased person will be cremated. So why are these things important? Well, the transfer of merit will help the dead person have a better rebirth. Or maybe we could argue it's better for the living, because the practice of cremation and the involvement with the Sangha and so much helps those who've lost someone let go of the dead person through the grieving process. It's also a meditation on anicca for the people left behind. Death is an important opportunity to realize all of life is impermanent. Mahayana funerals, in particular, in Mahayana countries, begin when someone whispers the name of the Buddha into their ear. So this is the last thing a person hears before they die. After death, relatives will wash the body, and they'll place the body in a coffin surrounded by wreaths and candles. The funeral often takes place a few days after the death to allow the first bardo state to happen. During this period, the dead person is understood to be going through a series of confused intermediate bardo states and is capable of being influenced even at this time. This is the time when the dead person becomes conscious of being dead and the next form of rebirth is decided. Buddhists in Mahayana countries think that rebirth takes up to 49 days, 7 weeks after death, although Theravada reject this, don't agree with it. Ceremonies and rituals in Tibet and Japan differ between, however, Tibetan and Japanese traditions and between different geographical areas. Tibet is famous for its sky burial practice, where the body is left in a high place as a gift to the vulture. It's kind of strange, but in a country with little firewood and hard ground unable to be dug up, this makes a kind of a sensible choice. It's an act of dana, a generous act to the vultures. Revered leaders, amongst others, will be burnt and cremated, with the remains placed in a chorten, a sort of memorial structure which is sometimes called a stupa, which becomes a place of worship of important lamas in Tibetan Buddhism. Ceremonies will involve prayers and making offerings of yak butter lamps, which will be made every 7 days for 49 days after death to help guide the person. Why are sky burials important? Well, it's important because placing the dead body in a high place is a gift to the vultures. This is because many Tibetan Buddhists believe that vultures aid the eschatological process of rebirth. So it's for the dead person. It's also a lesson of impermanence, and this could be both for the dead person in the bardo state and for the relatives. It's a last act of generosity for the dead person, whereby the dead person is helped and can help feed the vultures. Now, the Book of the Dead describes the three bardo states. The first bardo is the stage of separation. In this stage, the individual is removed, disconnected from their former role. The deceased has a Tibetan Book of the Dead recited over their body. The deceased hears this and will be visited by a clear light. It states that in the book, if they welcome the light, they will be reborn, but most flee out of fear and continue the journey to rebirth. It provides guidance for the individual who's dead and their mind to reach enlightenment. As the book is read, the monk addresses the mind of the dead. The passage known as the liberation upon hearing is read from the Book of the Dead, symbolizing a warning to those attending the funeral, for their actions in the forthcoming days may result in their loved one being reborn in hell. So this is what it says. It says, this is what's read to the dead person, when visions of higher realms arise, should your relatives near the place you left behind sacrifice many sentient beings dedicated for the benefit of the dead, you will have impure visions and become extremely angry. This will cause you to be reborn in hell. So whatever your relatives do in your place you left behind, do not grow angry, but cultivate love. Cultivate love. That's the instruction, to cultivate love when you're dead. In the second bardo state, the individual has left the original state. He's not yet reached the final stage, either one thing or another. The passage read from the Tibetan Book of the Dead guides and is a tool to guide the person through this transition between lives. And a warning is given. There are 3 or possibly 4 paths that are wrong paths. You could become a hungry ghost. You could end up in a hell, reborn in a hell realm, or an animal realm. Or the proper rebirth, the successful rebirth, the third bardo stage. Incorporation is the final stage when an individual will have a successful rebirth. They'll be accepted back into society as they are reborn in a new life, having a new transformed identity. The individual is in a current state of seeking a new body. He sees past thoughts and action, he steers them towards their future parents, and is rewarded with the next life in a successful rebirth. So lastly then, Japanese practices and the importance of name. In Pure Land traditions in Japan, they would hold a funeral service. The coffin would be placed with the head pointing west towards the Pure Land. Those around will chant Name Amida Butsu as they process around it. They're putting your faith in Minataba. Those attending will read from sutras, perhaps the Lotus Sutra or the Pure Land Sutra. Cremation would follow the wake and interment of the bones, ashes at a family stone monument with flowers, incense, and water in front of the monument. Other Buddhists in Japan of the Nichiren sect would definitely read from the Lotus Sutras. That's key for their sect. It's common in Japan for relatives to come together again to pick the bones using chopsticks. As in all Mahayana traditions, these 49 days of prayers are very important. On the 7th day, prayers are offered, the body's cremated, the bones are picked, and he's buried in a family group grave. We can see the big chopsticks and the bone picking in the bottom. And lastly, importantly, across traditions is the idea in Mahayana Japanese Buddhism of the precept name. And it's a bit of a racket. The Japanese monks will offer to discover by esoteric means a precept name called a kamyo, a precept name. And it's written in a special language, the Chinese kanji language. The length of the name and the longer the name, the better the person's rebirth. And so to get a good name, you either have to be a very good person or you have to make a sizable donation. And this name will stop their spirit returning to the family when the family say their ordinary name. The name will be inscribed in a special ihi or spirit tablet and kept in a house in a shrine but never spoken in case you invite the spirit back. And so we can see here a Japanese funeral shrine, and this would also be turned into a permanent shrine in the home. You can see the photo today would be a digital photo, spirit tablet, the offerings, the messages and letters from the deceased, and the flower petals will be offered to the altar. So the name, the spirit name, is both for the living and for the dead. And you want the person to go on to a good rebirth, to a new life, or you want them to chant Aminataba's name to help them get to the Pure Land. But you also want to deal with the body, so cremation, the ashes, and so on. And you don't want spirits to kind of muck your life up, so you pay for this special kamyo name in the kanji language. So this has been Buddhist practices. This is video 5 of 5 videos. Make sure you've done some practice questions, looking at some of our topics, learned the key vocabulary, and done the Quizlets on quotation.